Hi, I'm Atomicus from OWKings.com, and today I'll talk about Pharah and Numbani, anything from team compositions to different engagement angles and whatnot. As of yet, Pharah works against certain compositions, primarily ones that don't have that many hit-skin heroes such as McCree, Widowmaker, and Soldier 76. Before we continue, make sure you check out the main guide for Pharah since I'll skip the basic stuff about her in this video. Numbani offers a nice variety of high ground areas and enough airspace to make Pharah a viable pick on this map overall. In this video, I'll cover both the defense and the offense sides. First of all, I'll talk about the comps that helps Pharah the most on this map. The standard dive comp can be used on this map with some small changes to the team roster. D.Va, Winston, Genji, Ana, and Lucia or Zen can easily help Pharah secure the needed kills on any hit-scan heroes that might contest her. Zen can potentially help much more than Lucio can in the end, especially on non-King of the Hill maps. Replacing Ana with Tracer can also work if you feel strong about your DPS players, and the potential snowball momentum with this roster can become quite high. This is a comp that is very strong against poke comps, the ones that include snipers or key targets. This dive comp is quite common on the first point of Numbani due to the high ground areas. You can dive on a certain enemy and burst him down with your mobile roster of heroes. In this case, since you're playing Pharah, you want to dive the hit-scan heroes that can potentially contest you. The other comp that is usually used on hybrid and payload maps involves Reinhardt, Soldier 76, Zarya or Roadhog, Ana and Zen or Lucio. This comp is more about winning the shield battles and dealing damage from afar as Pharah. You can still engage if you have a Lucio, but you'll usually be alone if you decide to flank. Now keep in mind that you should consider your options based on your current comp, and that throughout the match, you'll have to adopt a different approach for each point, as the enemy team might swap their team composition to something different to potentially counter you. I'm going to cover the attack side first, so let's move on to the first point. There are several paths that lead to the point, and each with their own advantages and flaws. Ideally, you don't want to use every one of these paths as Pharah, since some don't even give you any advantages, but I will talk about them regardless so you know what to expect from the enemy team while defending, or how your team can benefit from them with certain comps. First you have the main road, which is the shortest route towards the point. Unfortunately, you're also on the low ground, so unless you have a comp that can jump from here, you will never be able to accomplish anything in the end, due to the enemy team holding the high ground. This path is best used with the dive comp, since you can immediately jump on the high ground and dive on any squishy targets that are holding up here. This path also benefits Pharah because you can scout the enemy team while also poking them and potentially engaging on a key target. Another way of approaching the point is by going up these stairs in order to reach one side of the high ground. This is usually used with a slow comp, since the doorway here acts as a massive choke point, so unless you have a Reinhardt shield, you won't manage to push through here if the enemy team has some players holding here. This is a spot that you want to avoid as Pharah, since you can't really fly through here, and even if you manage to go through with your team, you might get shot down from the other side. Next up we have this area that's under the high ground I talked about earlier. It offers cover at the expense of another choke point that the enemy team can use against you. Because of this, teams usually sneak through here to reach the stairs and eventually either fight in the corridor or attempt to take control of the other high ground area. You can use this as Pharah as long as you're going together as a team, since you can spam rockets in the corridor if the enemy team decides to engage you in here. It's not an ideal path for Pharah, but it can work sometimes. The last route you can use is the far left one, which is most commonly used by flankers. You don't usually see an entire team pushing through here due to the high ground advantage that the enemy has over this area. When it comes to Pharah, however, this is a path that can benefit her, mostly because you can potentially knock someone off the map by using your concussive blast on any enemies that are holding near the edge. So, in the end, the first and last paths are the ones that benefit Pharah the most, and you'll have to identify when you should be using any of these routes that lead towards the point. If you have a dive comp, using the first and last will greatly benefit Pharah and help secure the needed picks on any hit-scan heroes that the enemy team might have. If you have a slow comp, with Reinhardt shield, you can use any of the paths that I mentioned by sticking together with a team and winning the shield battles if they have any. You can also use the first and last paths by flanking on your own, but in this case, you won't have the same support that you can receive from a dive comp. When it comes to how the enemy team is holding this point, usually the team splits in two groups, one holding on one of the high ground areas while the other holds on the opposite side. Good teams will swap their positions against dive comps in order to make them waste their mobility abilities to reach an area where the DPS players aren't even holding anymore. In this case, scouting is very important, and as Pharah, you can do just that from the main area or from the far left side. Identify the key targets and try working with your team in order to pick them off. Once the point gets captured, you get a payload, and since the team fights can happen anywhere between your spawn and the payload's delivery point, I will cover the most common areas. Most fights will happen around corners, so I'll talk about how you can position yourself accordingly to each of these areas. The first corner doesn't really count since it's so close to your spawn, and you should be able to push the enemy team easily, but some enemy teams might hold aggressively here, so in this case, just poke them away with your rockets from afar. Next up, you basically have two corners in one area before reaching the next point for this map. For the first corner, ideally you want to use the platforms around here so that you can slowly poke any players that are trying to contest the payload around the boss. The second corner is where the team fights become trickier. Just like the first point, there's also a high ground area for the second point. This is where you will most likely encounter the hit scan heroes and Ana, since it's hard to pick them off without the proper heroes that have high mobility. Ideally, you want to contest a high ground before pushing the payload, so there are several ways of doing that as Pharah. First, you've got the right side area that allows you to fly to the high ground in a relatively safe manner, without exposing yourself to the heroes that are holding up there. If you don't have a dive comp or any heroes that can support you in this area, you will have to contest the high ground on your own, potentially surprising anyone who is holding up here. The other way of reaching the high ground is from the far left side, which once again allows you to get behind the enemy lines without exposing yourself unless an enemy is paying attention to this area. The drawback of going this way is that if you have Ana in your comp, she won't be able to heal you due to the building blocking her line of sight when she is with the rest of your team on the main road. Because of this, ideally you want to have some mobile heroes to support you, otherwise it will be very hard to successfully flank this way. However, if they don't have too many heroes holding up here, you can potentially surprise the enemy and pick them off if you manage to get close without getting spotted. So, when it comes to this point, the main goal here is to contest the high ground or distract the enemy team while your team is slowly pushing the payload. Use any of the two flanking paths accordingly to how many heroes they have on the high ground and support your team as much as possible. Once the payload reaches the second point, the last stretch for this map begins. The team fights will continue to happen around corners, so there are two primary areas where most of the fights will happen. The first one is at the end of the underpass, and usually you won't have trouble pushing through here unless you don't have any shields to protect you from incoming spam damage. As Pharah, just focus on winning the shield battles and slowly push the payload around the corner. So that's the main idea if you're going through the underpass. However, there's also the rooms above this area that allows you to flank in several ways. You don't really want to go as far out through these rooms, especially alone, because you can't really fly in this area, and if they have tanky heroes patrolling around, you'll be easily punished. Only flank this way if they have squishy heroes that you can potentially pick off due to the fact that the overall rooms are small, so using your rockets here is pretty easy. Best way of going through this area without dying is by having some teammates around to help you out. So, this area has 3 exits that helps you flank the main road. One leads to the left side, one to a balcony, and the last one leads to where the enemy team will usually hold. Flanking from the left side will help you get closer to any heroes holding there, such as long-range hit-scan heroes like the Widowmaker or Soldier 76. Going to the balcony will allow you to either gain a lot of height with your jump jet ability, or just a high ground advantage over any enemies that are holding below the balcony. Keep in mind that if they have a Widowmaker, she can snipe you from their spawn area, so avoid the balcony if you know she's watching this area. Now for the right side exit. The only thing you should be using this for as Pharah is to spam rockets towards the road from upstairs. Since the enemy team will most likely hold on the main road, you don't want to walk into them, so just use it to build up your barrage by spamming rockets in there. Moving on to the next corner, this is the last area before reaching the final point for Numbani. Things can become quite tricky for Pharah in this area, because there's a lot of space that both her and the hit-scan heroes can benefit from. There are 2 ways of approaching the last point. One is by flanking from the left side, which is risky since you won't have any cover, so you should identify a key target like Ana or Soldier 76, and you use your concussive blast to boost yourself towards them and potentially pick them off. The more you stay in the open, the more likely you will die to the hit-scan heroes. The second way is the right path that you can take through this building and flank any heroes that are holding on the high ground near the trees. Ideally, you want to push the enemy team towards their spawn before flanking this way. You can also just push to the main area together with your team as long as you're careful enough not to get picked off by any heroes that are holding in their backline. Once you've pushed the enemy team towards their spawn, at this point the only cover you'll be able to use is the payload, so keep that in mind if you want to push through the main area. The previous flanking routes that I mentioned earlier are still valid when it comes to the last point, so use them accordingly to how the enemy team is positioned. Lastly, if you have the chance, you want to position yourself above the enemy team's spawn exits so you can pick off any players that will try to contest the payload after respawning. When it comes to using your barrage, best way of using it on your own on attack is by flanking and unleashing it from behind enemy lines on any key targets that might contest you. As always, try to combo your barrage with a Reinhardt, Mei, or Zarya ulti if any are available. So that's pretty much the attacking side for Numbani. Now I'm going to cover the defense for this map. Not a lot changes as you can probably imagine. Your main focus is to hold the high ground areas and potentially flank the enemy team when it's possible or when your team wants to counter push. The first thing you can do before the round officially starts is to shoot a couple of rockets towards the enemy spawn as the doors open. This way you can build up your ulti a bit if they're not paying attention or if they don't have a shield as they go out. Make sure not to stay too much here, since there's always the risk of the enemy team running a Widowmaker in their comp. Once you started heading back towards the point, ideally you want to scout the enemy team to see where they're going to head out in the beginning. Do you remember the paths that I've talked about on attack? Well, your job here is to let your team know where the enemy will be pushing from and position yourself accordingly. Always be on the high ground initially and just swap between the two areas, helping out your supports or by trying to go on any enemy key targets that might contest you. If they have a Widowmaker in their comp, then you should prioritize picking her off before doing anything else. Usually she will be either around the boss in the main area or on the left high ground area, since she can use her grapple hook to get there. So yeah, when it comes to this point, in the end you just have to prioritize the players that can contest you, and if they don't have anything that can counter you, help your support heroes if they're getting jumped on. Remember to always scout to see how the enemy team will push so you can position yourself accordingly. Coming up next, we have the first couple of corners that lead to the second point of Numbani. For the first and second corner, you can passively spam rockets at the enemy team from the high ground platforms, and when it gets to the last corner, you need to be careful not to get flanked from the left or right side. Be careful not to get caught in this building, as most heroes could easily pick you off in this small area. Same rules from the first point apply here as well, and you can use the buildings to boost yourself with the concussive blast if your team wants to counter push. A nice spot for contesting the payload once it's close to the point is this area that offers you some cover towards the rest of the main road. If you have your barrage up, you can potentially get several picks if the enemy team is not aware of your location. Moving on to the next part of this map, you'll mostly be sitting on the balcony since it helps you cover all entry points. From here, you just have to be careful about the rooms near you because the enemy team can pick you off easily if you're not careful. If you feel like you're not getting heavily contested here, then you can also flank the enemy team when they're pushing through the underpass. This move is stronger, especially if you have your barrage up, since you can easily sandwich the enemy team. If some of the enemy players are contesting you from the rooms near the balcony, you can fly above the pass and relocate on the other side near the mega health pack inside the building. From here you can cover the balcony and the main road while also having the option of going upstairs and either flank the enemy players holding up there or the enemies that are pushing through the underpass. Worst case scenario, if these spots are heavily contested, then you can just passively spam rockets from your team's backline. For the last stretch of Numbani, ideally you want to hold the high ground on the left. This way you can cover the main road and the left path inside the building. Covering the right side usually puts you in the open, so it's not really ideal. If they have Soldier 76, he will usually flank through there with his tactical visor, and there isn't much you can do against it. From here you can counter-engage by either flanking through the building and getting behind the team, or by just flying above the main road. If they have any heroes sitting on the balcony, then your best bet of reaching them is by going through the left building, then using your concussive blast to boost yourself towards them. You can technically hold right side near the doorway, but if you get flanked, your only chance for cover is going inside the building, and that's not an ideal place for Pharah to be in due to the lack of space for flying. When it comes to using your barrage on your own, flanking is still your best bet even on defense, unless you can combo with the heroes that have good synergy with you. Alright, that's pretty much it when it comes to Pharah and Numbani. Hopefully you've learned some new things from this video, and as always, thanks for watching and have a good one. Take care.